Hey, how's it going? I vape the Liquid Barn tobaccos and you are going to learn all about them. I have their sweet pipe tobacco, their vanilla cream tobacco, and their normal tobacco flavor. Standard disclaimer time, I didn't pay for these. Shout out to Liquid Barn. We're going to start out with their sweet pipe tobacco. So I'm by no means a tobacco expert, but this is going to be interesting. Their sweet pipe tobacco, I get the sweet part. Not sure I get any of the actual pipe tobacco part. There's basically no tobacco here. I feel like there's maybe a little bit of like dry harshness that kind of reminds me of the drier harsh part of like TPA's RY4 double. Maybe that's standing in for an actual tobacco note. But when you say pipe tobacco, I expect something like darker and robust and aromatic, and I'm basically not getting any of that. The sweetness here is interesting. There's like a light vanilla here. It feels somewhere between like marshmallow and cream soda, and like a little bit of like a fluffier mouthfeel. It actually reminds me quite a bit of Flavor Art's Oba Oba, which I know is occasionally used as a tobacco additive. I'm thinking this might just be a tobacco additive because I don't taste the actual tobacco here. I did try mixing this with some tobaccos, and that kind of seems to bear it out. I mixed it with some Black for Pipe by Inawera, some Kentucky Blend by Flavora, and it pretty much does what Oba Oba does. It kind of gives a little bit of extra mouthfeel, sweetens it up a little bit, kind of knocks off the rough edges. So yeah, I mean, gun to my head, I'm going to have to say this is primarily some kind of like sweeter tobacco additive, maybe for turning a normal tobacco into a sweet pipe tobacco, as opposed to a standalone sweet pipe tobacco. Liquid Barn suggests mixing with this at 10%. I don't see the point. I mean, really, as a solo flavor. Just some really rough estimates. It seems like maybe 4% of this is equivalent to maybe about 0.5% of Flavor Art's Oba Oba in terms of what it's actually doing to the tobacco. So, I mean, maybe use that as a guide. It's not necessarily something I'd advocate go running and picking up, but I think it's an interesting thing to pair with tobaccos if you already have it. But yeah, this one stumped me a little bit, and it gets weirder from there. So next I have their vanilla cream tobacco. This is going to sound repetitive. Get a whole bunch of vanilla cream, not much in the way of tobacco. So the vanilla cream here actually feels a little bit like a vanilla whipped cream. There's like a light kind of commercial vanilla taste to it, more like a frosting vanilla. The actual description for this calls out vanilla bean, but I'm not getting any of those kind of like darker, spicier notes. Just seems like kind of a softer, muted vanilla flavor. There's quite a bit of cream texture here. Actually, it feels a little bit fluffy, like a whipped cream. You do get like a little bit of a buttery bottom end to it, but there isn't anything like too aggressively like dairy-ish to it. So it kind of just tastes like a dollop of whipped cream that also happens to have some very strange tobacco in there. The tobacco here is fairly subtle, I guess, and it's a little bit hard to actually pick up what's going on behind all of that vanilla cream. What I do get is a very light, sort of bright tobacco flavor. I'd call it like grassy. It has like maybe a little bit of like a citrus character to it, and then the actual tobacco itself seems like mostly like hay notes, that kind of like coumarin kind of taste to it. It definitely is hiding out behind that like heavy, thick, almost waxy vanilla cream. You mostly get it on the exhale more than anything else. And it doesn't really mesh all that well for me. You know, when you have a vanilla tobacco in general, you're going to be pairing like darker tobaccos there, especially with a cream. You want something that's going to cut through all that cream body. This kind of goes the opposite direction. It gives you like a very light, almost summery kind of tobacco up against that very heavy vanilla cream, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Liquid Barn suggests 9% for this. I mean, that's fine. You know, there's nothing off about that vanilla cream there. That tobacco note is still very much in the background there, and it's still a little bit too green. So what I would do with this, that 9% will work, but I would use as a base and then add in your own heavier kind of tobacco. I think this has some of the same stuff going on that sweet pipe tobacco had, with that kind of like vaguely oba-oba-ish effect, because of that mouthfeel and that sweetness and that light bit of vanilla. So it should work pretty well if you want to go ahead and throw like another dark tobacco at it. The Inawera Black or Dark for Pipe would work really well. Fulvora Cavendish or whatever. Again, I would kind of use it as like an additive to take an existing tobacco closer to a vanilla cream tobacco than an actual, standalone tobacco by itself. Next, I have their just straight tobacco flavor. So for something called tobacco, I taste a whole lot of cloves here. Their actual description is something along the lines of like a robust old world tobacco infused with cloves and a hint of ripe berries. Mostly what I get off of this is clove. I happen to like clove, so that's really not a big deal. But yeah, this is pretty clove heavy. The actual clove here is actually pretty good, as far as cloves go. It doesn't taste exactly like a clove cigarette, but it does taste like that sort of clove note for a cigarette. It's definitely going to be a tobacco clove. It's kind of dry and spicy. One of the really interesting things about it is it tends to work pretty well for me. So cloves just absolutely knock out my palate. Like I get 3 good drags on anything heavy in clove and it's done. It's just donezo. My sinuses just give up for the day. This, instead of going like kind of sour like TPA or FA's clove does, when it starts to fade out, it just kind of fades out to a less aggressive version of itself, which is nice. It works a lot like Fulvora's clove that way. It's a very good tobacco clove. I feel like when it does start to fade out though, it maybe gets a little bit dry, a little bit chalky. It feels like a little bit of what was going on in that sweet pipe tobacco, that kind of like oba-oba additive thing is coming through a little bit clearer after that clove wears off. So I'm going to say that maybe some of that stuff is in this one too. The actual tobacco here is pretty good. It's just really light. It's a subtle accent. It's a darker tobacco, but it's a light touch of a darker tobacco, if that makes any sense. You do get some kind of like herbal, almost sassafras notes from it, which are really nice, but I'm not sure how much of that is just a clove bleeding through into the tobacco. But yeah, it's good. I just kind of wish there was more of it here, because that clove really does just like sit right at the front of the flavor. They mentioned ripe berries in here. I don't really see that. I don't know. If they didn't say ripe berries, I wouldn't be able to pick them out. As it stands, I get maybe just a little bit of like a slightly tannic, kind of musky, almost like flavor at bilberry, kind of dry berry note here. It's not bad. I would have just assumed it's part of the tobacco, but it isn't really strong enough to be a discrete component. I mean, I wouldn't mix with this looking for berries. They're just kind of there. Almost junipery. They work pretty well, but it's a little bit of an afterthought for me. So Liquid Barn suggests mixing with this at 9%. And, that's fine if you like clove, It gives you a nice forward kind of tobacco clove without the actual tobacco underneath it. Dark, dry, spicy tobacco would work well here. If you want to get really filthy with it, you go for like one of the Arabian or Turkish Oriental kind of tobaccos that have that kind of like dry herbal note and really kick that up. Or you could go for something a little bit darker and kind of nutty and mellow, like your Fulvora Kentucky blends or whatever the equivalent from Inawera is for that. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's worth trying if you're into cloves, but just tobacco might be a little bit of a stretch. I'd probably call it like clove tobacco or something fancy like that. Liquid Barn does have a tobacco flavor, which I did not get a sample of, which is cool. I got everything else. I'm not worried about it. But it's a butterscotch graham tobacco. So if you go into buying that, I can't give you any actual notes, but just expect there not to be much actual tobacco in there. I've had it in mixes before that got sent to me, and it's really hard to pick out the tobacco. The rest of it seemed pretty solid, but again, I can't test it right now. I'm not quite sure what I thought I was getting into with Liquid Barn tobaccos, but I still managed to be a little surprised. So overall, I think they're like more interesting tobacco blending agents more than like standalone tobaccos, which is a bit of a bummer. If you're going to be mixing something at 9-10%, you kind of want it to work as a standalone. These while they have some of the characteristics you'd associate around a tobacco, I feel like they could really be boosted up in the actual tobacco part of the flavor. But I mean, there's ways around that. At the very least, they were interesting, and I crave novelty, so, thumbs up. But yeah, if you were looking at Liquid Barn tobaccos, those are my quick and dirty notes on them. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you very much for watching. I do appreciate it. I'll catch you later.